History has no shortage of the weird, the bizarre, and the little known. Did you know, for example, that medieval France and Spain had a caste of Christian de facto untouchables? Or that a desperate Briton in World War II turned to an anti-tank grenade that had the unfortunate drawback of getting glued stuck to the user's hand after the pin was pulled? How about the Golden Girl star who had been a World War II U.S. Marine? Following are 20 things about these and other lesser-known facts from history. Number 20. The horrific costs of invading Japan. The resources committed to invading Japan dwarfed those of D-Day in France. They included 42 aircraft carriers, 24 battleships, 400 destroyers and destroyer escorts, tactical air support from the 5th, 7th, and 13th Air Forces and 14 divisions for the initial landing. Casualties would have been horrific, depending on the degree of Japanese civilian resistance, and Japanese authorities were busy training even women and children to fight the invaders with spears and pointy sticks. Worst-case scenarios envisioned over 1 million Allied and tens of millions Japanese casualties. Planners were unaware of the highly secretive Manhattan Project. When the U.S. successfully tested an atomic bomb in July 1945, its game-changing potential was not fully understood. Viewed simply as really big bombs, planners had nebulous ideas of using atomic weapons during the November invasion in support of the amphibious landings. However, their use instead against Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 shocked the Japanese government to its senses, ended the war, and eliminated the need to invade Japan. Number 19. Britain's greatest romantic poet romanced his sister. George Gordon Byron, 6th Baron Byron, 1788-1824, was a leading figure in the Romantic movement, a poet, satirist, politician and peer. His poems and personality captured Europe's imagination. Among his best-known poetic works are the gloomy Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, the satiric Don Juan, and the short love poem She Walks in Beauty. Byron is widely regarded as one of Britain's best poets, known and acclaimed for his brilliant use of the English language. However, he gained further fame or infamy and became even better known for his flamboyance, amorous lifestyle, and the notoriety of his sexual escapades with both men and women. His most infamous sexual escapade was a years-long incestuous relationship with his sister. Number 18. Byron had a love child with his sister, and kept a collection of his lover's pubes. Lord Byron's most problematic affair was an incestuous one with his own sister Augusta Lee, whom Byron had seen little of during childhood. He made up for it by forming an extremely close relationship with her in adulthood. In 1814, the poet fathered a daughter upon his sister, making Byron the child's uncle as well as father. A sentimentalist, Byron liked to keep mementos of his lovers. In those days, the norm for mementos was a lock of hair from one's object of affection, perhaps tied with a ribbon, but being Byron, Britain's most flamboyant poet, eccentric aristocrat and all-around pervert, a simple lock of hair would not do. Instead, Byron liked to snip clumps of pubic hair from his lover's crotches, and kept them catalogued and labeled in envelopes. Number 17. Byron's most famous affair ended in an epic poetic put-down. Byron's most infamous affair was with his sister, but his most famous one was with the married Lady Caroline Lamb. She rejected him at first, describing him as mad, bad and dangerous to know. Lady Lamb changed her mind, however, and had a torrid affair with the poet that scandalized Britain. When Byron dumped her, a besotted Lady Lamb turned stalker, and pursued him relentlessly. She stopped at his house one time too many, and scribbled in a book on his desk, "Remember me." The exasperated Byron responded with a poem entitled "Remember Thee." Remember thee, remember thee. To Lethe quench life's burning stream, remorse and shame shall cling to thee and haunt thee like a feverish dream. Remember thee? I doubt it not, thy husband too shall think of thee. By neither shalt thou be forgot, thou false to him, thou fiend to me. Number 16. Romantic scandals forced a romantic poet to flee Britain and seek romantic adventures abroad. Mounting scandals eventually made Britain too hot for Byron, so he hit the road and roamed Europe for years at a stretch, including a 7-year stint in Italy. Restlessness eventually led him to join the Greeks in their war of independence from the Ottoman Turks. However, he was disappointed with the Greeks of his day, because they differed greatly from the heroic Hellenes described by Homer. While moping about that discrepancy, he caught a fever and died in a Greek backwater at the age of 36. Number 15. B. Arthur was a World War II Marine. Actress, comedian, and singer Beatrice B. Arthur, 1922 to 2009, had a rich career in entertainment. Her ambitions began while attending a girls' boarding school, where she was the tallest girl, and also the one voted wittiest by her classmates. She became an avid participant in drama programs and theatrical productions, entertaining her friends with imitations of Mae West. She dreamt of a career in show business, but did not think her parents would support her dreams. She eventually made it, and had an entertainment career that spanned 7 decades. During those years, she became famous for her signature sitcom roles as Maude Findlay in All in the Family and its spin-off Maude, and as Dorothy Zbornak in The Golden Girls. Before that, however, B. Arthur had been a World War II U.S. Marine. Number 14. Marine Sergeant B. Arthur. B. Arthur downplayed her World War II contributions, denying having served and steering questioners away by pointing out that others had done far more. However, the documentary records show that in 1943, aged 21, she had enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps under her birth name, Bernice Frankel. She worked as a typist and truck driver, and moved up the ranks from private to staff sergeant, before her honorable discharge in 1945. It was while serving in the Marines during the war that she met and married her husband Robert Arthur, whose last name she took. The marriage was short-lived, but she kept the name and became Beatrice B. Arthur. In hindsight, admirers of her no-nonsense characters would probably nod their heads at the aptness of Maude or Dorothy Zbornak having been a Marine sergeant. Number 13. The earthquake that devastated Lisbon on All Saints' Day. In the 18th century, Portugal's capital Lisbon was one of Europe's wealthiest cities and busiest seaports. On the morning of November 1, 1755, just as it began celebrating the religious festival of All Saints' Day, Lisbon was almost completely demolished by a powerful magnitude 9 earthquake, whose shocks were felt as far away as Finland, North Africa, and the Caribbean. Striking around 9:40 a.m., the upheaval opened fissures nearly 20 feet deep in the city's streets. Because of the religious festival, a significant percentage of the population were gathered in churches and cathedrals when the tremors began, and thousands were crushed to death as the houses of worship collapsed atop them. As the tremors subsided, another danger arose as fires erupted around the city, first individually, then joining together to transform Lisbon into a giant inferno. Then things got worse. Number 12. A tsunami wave swept away earthquake survivors praying for divine help. Shaken and frightened survivors of the Lisbon earthquake sought to escape the fires and falling debris, so they rushed towards the harbor, where the large open squares of the royal palace promised safety from both conflagration and collapsing buildings. There, they were further alarmed when they encountered the incongruous sight of a harbor without water, with ships resting on the seabed. Gathering in the drying silt of the harbor's bottom, the survivors were led by priests in fervent prayers, beseeching God's mercy and forgiveness of whatever sins had occasioned such divine wrath. Many were still praying and begging God's mercy in the harbor, when the sea returned with a vengeance. A tsunami with a wall of water 40 feet high swept in and drowned them. Number 11. The Lisbon earthquake and tsunami raised thorny theological questions. Total casualties of the Lisbon earthquake are estimated to have been as high as 60,000 deaths in the city alone. 100,000 or more deaths might have occurred in the Lisbon region, plus many more injured. The earthquake occurred as the Enlightenment was getting into full swing, and it inspired significant philosophical discourse and exchanges. The tragedy furthered the development of theodicy, or the question of how a just and good God could allow what happened in Lisbon to take place. The thorniest theodicy question was why God had sent an earthquake to crush his worshippers by the thousands in cathedrals and churches as they gathered in prayer to celebrate All Saints' Day and glorify his name. The question was compounded and made thornier yet by his subsequent sending of a tsunami to drown the survivors who had been praying for his mercy in Lisbon's harbor. Number 10. The king who bankrupted himself building fairytale castles. Ludwig II of Bavaria, better known as Mad King Ludwig, reigned from 1864 until his death in 1886. A generous benefactor of the arts, he was an admirer and patron of the composer Richard Wagner. During his reign, Ludwig devoted himself to artistic and architectural projects, including opulent fairytale castles and palaces, whose construction he lavishly funded to the point of bankrupting himself. After Bavaria joined the German Empire in 1871, Ludwig withdrew from governance, concerning himself only intermittently with affairs of state. He went into a morbid seclusion and devoted himself to his true passion, the arts. He worshipped the theater and the opera, especially the works of Richard Wagner, whose lifelong patron he became. He also developed a mania for extravagant building projects in the Bavarian mountains. Number 9. Castle construction mania. Ludwig II kicked off his mania with the Linderhof Palace, patterned on the Trianon Palace and built between 1869 to 1878. Simultaneously, he began building his most famous project, Neuschwanstein, a fairy tale castle precariously situated on a crag, and decorated with scenes from Wagner's operas. Built from 1869 to 1886, it inspired Disneyland's Sleeping Beauty Castle. As that one was being built, Ludwig started an even more ambitious project in 1878, the Herrenchiemsee Palace, a copy of Versailles. It was never completed because the Mad King went bankrupt. Between the abandonment of his official duties, profligate spending, and withdrawal into the life of a recluse among other odd behavior, Ludwig's ministers finally had enough. In 1886 he was declared insane by a panel of doctors, and sent to a remote palace by a psychiatrist. 3 days later, the deposed monarch drowned himself in a lake, and took his psychiatrist with him. Today, the Mad King's architectural and artistic legacy include many of Bavaria's biggest tourist attractions. Number 8. The lovable tramp was a total perv. English actor Charlie Chaplin was and remains one of Hollywood's most readily recognizable stars, the silent film era's most famous figure. He is one of the silver screen's all-time greats, in addition to being a pioneer who revolutionized acting and comedy. Chaplin was also a sexual pervert who liked him young, so young as to cause scandal, derail his career, and get him deported from the U.S. Chaplin also seems to have been Harvey Weinstein before there was a Harvey Weinstein. He is credited with pioneering the casting couch, whereby powerful Hollywood figures extracted sexual favors from actresses during auditions. Reportedly, Chaplin used caption cards during auditions to prompt aspiring actresses into increasingly suggestive acts and poses until they stood before him naked or nearly so. Number 7. Charlie Chaplin got off on throwing pies at women. Charlie Chaplin's kinks went beyond run-of-the-mill quid pro quo sexual harassment and entered the realm of the unusual. For one thing, he had a thing for pies, and not just as comedic props and gags. After getting actresses to disrobe during auditions, Chaplin would begin by groping them in exaggerated ways, then, having worked himself up by getting them to do a striptease on demand, followed by a groping session, he would stand them naked against a wall and throw pies at them. Chaplin also had a penchant for orgies, and liked to organize them with his friend and fellow comedic film star, Fatty Arbuckle. Those orgies came to a screeching halt in 1921, when Fatty Arbuckle was accused of raping a woman to death, and tried for her murder. Although Arbuckle was acquitted, the Chaplin-Arbuckle orgy parties never resumed. Number 6. Charlie Chaplin's cradle robbing got him deported. Charlie Chaplin's greatest scandals arose from his propensity for cradle robbing. He liked much younger women. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, a pervert himself if ever there was one, had long disliked Chaplin's political leanings, and used his sex scandals to launch a smear campaign against him. In 1944, he had Chaplin prosecuted for violating the Mann Act, which prohibits the transportation of women across state lines for sexual purposes. Chaplin was acquitted, but his reputation was severely damaged. In 1952, while Chaplin was in London for a film premiere, the U.S. Department of Justice revoked the British actor's re-entry visa. It stated that he would have to submit to an interview concerning his politics and morality before re-entering the United States. Chaplin decided not to bother, cut his ties with the U.S., and settled in Switzerland. Number 5. When Europe was swept by poisoning panics. 17th-century Europeans were prone to paranoid episodes about poisoning. They seemed to have a standing fear that nefarious people planned to spread a plague throughout Christendom via sinister means, such as sorcery and witchcraft or mysterious poisonous gases. Such fears led to a great panic that swept the city of Milan, Italy. It began in 1629. After the city's governor received an alarming message from King Philip IV of Spain, it warned the governor to be on the lookout for 4 Frenchmen who had escaped from a Spanish prison and might be en route to Milan to spread the plague via poisonous and pestilential ointments. Number 4. The Great Poisoning Scare. For months after receiving a royal warning, tensions kept steadily mounting in Milan. The alarmed citizens kept a wary lookout for suspicious characters, and grew steadily more stressed out and frazzled as fears mounted of an imminent poisoning. The city thus sat on a powder keg for months, before finally erupting in what came to be known as the Great Poisoning Scare of Milan. It started on the night of May 17th, when some citizens reported seeing mysterious people placing what appeared to be poison in a cathedral partition. Health officials went to the cathedral, but found no signs of poisoning. The following morning the Milanese woke to find that all doors on the main streets had been marked with a mysterious daub. Number 3. Mysterious daubs lead to citywide panic. Milan's health officials inspected the mysterious daubs that had appeared on city walls, but found nothing harmful in them. They concluded that the markings were a prank by some mischievous people with a sick sense of humor, out to get some laughs out of the citizens' fears. Official reassurances did not assure, however, taking the mysterious daubs as a sign that the expected poison attack had finally arrived. Milan citizens went into a citywide bout of mass hysteria. They began accusing random people of acts of poisoning, ranging from passers-by on the streets to various nobles, to Cardinal Richelieu of France or General Wallenstein, commander of the armies of the Holy Roman Empire in the then raging 30 Years' War. Number 2. Hysteria sweeps in victims. Among the early victims of Milan's poisoning hysteria was an elderly man who was spotted wiping a bench in church before sitting down. A mob of crazed women accused him of poisoning the seat, and seized and violently assailed him in church. They then dragged him to the magistrates while continuing to beat him on the way, and ended up killing him en route. Even more tragic was the case of a pharmacist who was accused of being in cahoots with the devil when he was found with unknown potions. After prolonged torture and stretching on the rack, he changed his protestations of innocence to a confession of guilt, repeating whatever his torturers wanted to hear in order to end the pain, admitting to being in league with the devil and foreigners to poison the city. The pharmacist named other accomplices who were innocent of any crime. They in turn were arrested and tortured, and to end their suffering they named yet more innocents, repeating the process. All were tried, convicted based on the confession extracted under torture, and executed. Number 1. Hysteria led people to voluntarily accuse themselves. As Milan's mass hysteria and mounting insanity tightened its grip on the fevered city, many Milanese stepped forward to accuse themselves. Many went to the magistrates and voluntarily confessed to amazing deeds of the supernatural, describing meetings with the devil, witches, sorcerers, and sundry practitioners of black magic, in which they plotted to poison city. As reported, the number of persons who confessed that they were employed by the devil to distribute poison, almost incredible. Many were executed based on their voluntary false confessions. The hysteria did not subside until the city was struck by an even bigger catastrophe, an actual plague that swept through Italy and lasted into 1631.